It's time for Security Now. Steve Gibson is here. Newsflash, ransomware authors are not reliable. Shocking, isn't it? A new nation-state attack, we think from China. Why some Russian websites are saying, hey, I'm a teapot. And then the 100 million Samsung phones that have a fatal flaw and what you can do about it. It's all coming up next on Security Now.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Security Now with Steve Gibson, episode 860, recorded Tuesday, March 1st, 2022. Trust dies in darkness. Security Now is brought to you by ITProTV. Give your team an engaging IT development platform to level up their skills. Volume discounts start at 5 seats. Go to itpro.tv/securitynow and make sure to mention SN30 to your designated ITProTV account executive to get 30% off or more on a business plan. And by Privacy.com. Privacy lets you buy things online using virtual cards instead of having to use your real ones, protecting your financial identity on the internet. Right now, new customers will automatically get $5 to spend on their first purchase. Go to privacy.com/securitynow to sign up. And by Bitwarden. Get the password manager that offers a robust and cost-effective solution that can drastically increase your chances of staying safe online. Get started with a free trial of Teams or Enterprise plan, or get started for free across all devices as an individual user at bitwarden.com/twit. It's time for Security Now, and you couldn't have a better time for this guy to show up, Steve Gibson of GRC.com, our security guru, our privacy mentor, our sensei of
security.
Yeah, I was trying to find a new word for security.
It's a little alliterative
word for security. Yeah. Safety. Our sensei of safety. He's here.
I like that.
Yes. To lead us down the path to righteousness.
Lead us from darkness.
Yes.
Today's podcast is from the first portion of a recently released and to be shown later this year paper from 3 security researchers at the University of Tel Aviv. Podcast title is Trust Dies in Darkness.
Oh, boy.
It's a little gloomy. So we got Security Now number 860 for this first day of March. So that means we're going to have one of those weeks or a month where we get the earliest Patch Tuesday possible, which will be next Tuesday, March 8th. We'll get there in due time. We're going to examine first the consequences of paying ransomware extortions demands. How did that work out? We're going to take a deep look into Daxin, frankly, a somewhat terrifying malware from attackers linked to China. We take something of a retrospective look at Log4j and draw some lessons from its trajectory. We're going to touch on some technical consequences of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, including which kitchen appliances Russia's servers are claiming to be.
What? Okay.
I know.
Okay.
And the question of the possible consequences of the U.S. becoming involved in launching some cyber attacks at Russia.
I want to talk about that. I think that's a little interesting, the saber rattling.
Real mixed blessing.
Yeah.
We also have an interesting piece of listener feedback that comes from last week and the results of last week's next SpinRight development pre-release, which I mentioned was coming. It did. Then we're going to take a look at the significant mistake Samsung made, which crippled and compromised the security of all 100 million of their most recently made smartphones.
Yeah.
Because they did it in darkness.
Yeah.
And that's where trust goes to die.
Yes. They thought they were doing everything right.
They did, but they didn't let anybody see. And there are a number of things that we're going to talk about this week, which are basically putting meat on some of the fundamental principles that I've been talking about on the podcast for years.
It's the old pseudo-random number generator problem once again.
And we do have a fun picture of the week.
We do.
Which
see it.
which we'll be coming back to shortly.
Yes, any moment now. I'm going to call you the sensei of assembly language. That's what I'm going to call you. Our show today brought to you by ITProTV. As always, we love these guys at ITProTV. I've known Tim and Don since they started years ago. Watched them build this from nothing to the best way to get an IT education. We talk all the time about how ITProTV is great for individuals who want to get into IT, who want to get the skills, the certs, so they can get their first job. And then, of course, the individuals who are already in IT who want to upgrade their skills or recertify. We don't talk enough, though, about ITProTV for teams. They have a business offering that every business should consider. These days, you know how much you rely on your IT team. And I would submit we rely on their knowledge, how up-to-date they are with the latest things are changing rapidly. You need ITProTV. Your team has to help ensure your success, has to keep you from getting knocked out by ransomware. And, I have to tell you something. Your team will love ITProTV. I know this because 80% of users who watch an ITProTV video finish it from beginning to end. It's binge-worthy. It's engaging content that your team will learn from and enjoy every moment of. And that's exactly what I think you want. Give your team the tools they need to make your business thrive. The tech industry constantly changing, constantly evolving. You need to keep your team trained and up to date. It's actually a benefit of employee that your team will appreciate and you get the benefit of, right? When a new software release comes out, a new system upgrade, a new cyber threat faces your business, ITProTV is there. 7 studios recording all day, Monday through Friday, to get you the latest content. Over 5,800 hours in their library, constantly up to date. All the training, all the certifications your team needs done in one place. That is not an insignificant value right there. They've got it all. Every vendor, every skill you need for your IT team training. Microsoft, Cisco, Linux, Apple, security, cloud, on and on and on. All the topics from technical skills to compliance, even to soft skills. So it's not just your IT team. Your whole team will appreciate ITProTV. And you'll love the interface of the ITProTV team dashboard. Their business plan lets you track your team's results, manage seats, assign and unassigned team members, access monthly usage reports, metrics like logins and viewing time and tracks completed, etc. Makes it so easy to manage your teams. You could actually divide them into subsets and say, or even individuals, and say, you need to give them customized assignments. You need to learn this. I'd like you to work on this. Assignment can be the whole course, multi-video course, or even individual episodes within the course. It's very granular. And the reporting is fantastic. Everything you would like to know, insights into how your team's viewing, how much progress they're making, and so on. And it's all visual and pretty too, so you could justify it to the boss, right? ITProTV for individuals, ITProTV for teams. They're both great. Give your team the IT development platform they need to level up their skills while enjoying the journey. For teams of any size, from 2 to 1,000. I guess one person isn't a team, so you have to have 2 people. And you can have as many as 1,000. But the volume discounts start at 5 seats. And I never mentioned this, and I have, I've been remiss. You can get 30% off as a business plan, too, with our traditional offer code SN30. So go to ITPro.tv. That's the website, ITPro.tv. Please add /security now, just so they know you saw it here, and you get a nice welcome. And 30% off when you use the offer code SN30, SN30. I think there's nowhere to fill it in when you'll get a designated ITProTV account executive. That's nice, too, to have a voice, a person that you you interface with, just tell them SN30, SN30. And they'll go, ooh, you get 30% off, or maybe even more, on our business plans. ITProTV. We love them. ITPro.tv/security now. Offer code SN30. And now, the picture of the week.
So we have, I suppose, a programmer who has recently met his demise, presenting himself to the pearly gates. And now, traditionally, St. Peter has had a long scroll, which he's, scrolled through to find out the disposition of this recently passed person. But this is 2022, so he has a laptop. Anyways, St. Peter is telling the programmer, says here, you should be in hell. But since you coded in assembly, we'll count it as time served.
Oh, now you love your assembly language.
I just can't take that assembly away, period. Nope. It's my language.
For you, hell is a high-level language.
I visit there from time to time. I prefer assembly language.
What high-level languges do you write in?
Perl is
nice.
one.
Yeah.
Perl. I never got into PHP, but of course C. In fact, I'll be mentioning a little bit later that I implemented a cryptographic algorithm which I needed for Squirrel in C and open sourced it and I wrote it in C so that everybody else would have access to it. So, sort of whatever the need is. Gravity was written in C, and I've been maintaining it now for a few years. When it, famously at the beginning of 2020, it stopped working because the programmers put in if an article's date is 20 or later, that must be bogus. Well, that was true in 1980 when
not so much
gravity
now.
was in use, but not so much now. So it needed a little.
I love C. Kernahan and Ritchie, that little slim C programming language book. One of my favorite books of all time. It just it was so elegant and simple and beautiful. And I'd come from, as most of us had, basic, a little bit of basic. And when I found C, I was, this is probably 83 or 84, very early on. I just fell in love.
Well, and the idea, too, that the language would just provide a minimum structuring environment for the library. That is, most of C is in the functions, which you call, and then there's just a little bit of glue, some curly braces and some loops, looping structures and variable naming. But, I like that
in a language. I think a language should be easy to grasp. That's one of the reasons I like Lisp and Scheme and those languages. The idea is you could teach it in a day. You can learn it in a day. Then there's a lot more. But languages like Perl, where their philosophy is there's more than one way to do it. There's so many extra so much. Who was it? It was Perlis who said, syntactic sugar will give you cancer of the semicolon. It's there's so much syntactic sugar. There's so much extra stuff.
I have the perfect example for anybody who wonders what we're talking about in Perl. Everyone's heard about like the if statement. If this, then that. Do you really need unless?
No.
No, I'm not kidding. There's an unless.
Makes no sense. Oh, I know. We don't look. Lisp doesn't even have do loops. They don't even have. There's no iteration. You don't need it because it's all there, and And so the less you have to bend your mind to understand this, I think the sooner you can get down and getting stuff done. Yeah, unless, but maybe. Well, there's a maybe too, by the way. There's a maybe clause. Let's not get into it.
No. No, if you really want to, and we have mentioned this once before on the podcast, but there was once an exercise that some friends and I did of designing a language kind of backwards. So rather than having the go-to statement, you would have the come from. And you can actually do that.
Come from and okay. The beauty of
that one will hurt you.
Of C and your assembly and Lisp 2 is you can do macros. So if you want to have a come from, you can write it.
Oh, in fact, for example, I believe that language is for communication, not only with the computer, but for the programmer. So I have a macro, which the macro is 0, Z-E-R-O, and what it expands to is XORing P1 with P1. So anyway, so for example, in my code, I say 0 EAX, which zeros the EAX register.
And it's clearer to have that than the XOR. You know, and I know the XOR is zeroing it. But by writing 0, it's very clear when you're reading the code. The machine doesn't care.
No, same thing for the machine. Exactly.
Yeah. No, I love that. That's exactly right. You're writing for yourself 10 years from now, or even 6 months from now.
The older we get, the shorter the duration.
Why did I do that? What am I doing here?
Okay, so one of the things any victim of a ransomware extortion wonders is whether the bad guys, who at that moment hold all the cards, will honor their promises to never come back for a double dip at the ransom trough. Last week, HelpNet Security reported on the result of a global survey they conducted. A global survey that was conducted by the cybersecurity firm Venafi, V-E-N-A-F-I, which highlighted the unsurprising lack of trustworthiness. Yeah, who would have thunk of ransomware bad guys. The report found that in most cases, once the initial ransom is paid, the extortion shock does not end. And the report puts some numbers to this unsurprising conclusion. Venafi calls themselves the world's most trusted machine identity management platform. And while I don't know about that, I saw that they specialize in, among other things, keeping an organization from being surprised by the expiration of their machine identifying certificates. I know that my favorite company, DigiCert, does the same thing, so I guess Venafi does something similar. Although I don't think they make certs. Anyway, they are certainly aware of and in the enterprise space. Their survey revealed that 18%, so about 1 in 5, of victims who paid the ransom still had their data exposed on the dark web. 8% refused to pay ransom, and the attackers used every available extortion opportunity, like pushing them every way they could. 35% of victims paid the ransom, but nonetheless were still unable to retrieve their data. 1 in 3 paid the ransom. Oops, sorry, decryption didn't work. As for the ransomware actor extortion tactics, they summarized those too. 83% of all successful ransomware attacks featured double and even triple extortion. The first extortion being over the data encryption. The second extortion over the public release of confidential or trade secret data. And the third extortion is a DDoS. If we're going to attack you if you don't, follow one of our previous extortions. So, I mean, it's a mess. 38% of ransomware attacks threaten to use stolen data to extort the victim's customers. 35% of ransomware attacks threaten to expose stolen data on the dark web. And 32% of attacks threaten to directly inform the victim's customers of the data breach incident. And we've talked about this before, by way of embarrassing them. So Venafi explained that the lack of credibility of ransomware actors promises the actors' promises to their victims stems from several factors. First, most ransomware as a service operations are short-lived. So they simply look to maximize their profits in the shortest possible period of time. As such, they don't care about long-term reputation. We've witnessed on this podcast a continual churn of ransomware as a service names, with the suspicion that new actors coming on the scene are relabeled old actors. Of course, secondly, in ransomware as a service, the operators and their affiliates are separate entities. And many renegade affiliates don't follow the rules set by the core ransomware operators. Enforcing these rules is rarely considered a priority for the groups. Third, even if the data isn't leaked right away, the remnants of data breaches may be maintained for a long time in multiple threat actor systems, and almost always finds their way to the broader cybercrime community sooner or later. You know, you can imagine if you're a bad guy and you've got the goods on some company and you've promised to delete it, well, why would you? You could, for a while, maybe abide by your agreement. But again, really, we're talking criminals. So why expect non-criminal activity from bad guys? As Venefee's report underlines, paying the ransom is only motivating the crooks to return for more, as it sends the signal that the victim sees this as the easiest way out of trouble, which, is just an illusion. Venefee's vice president said, quote, "Organizations are unprepared to defend against ransomware that exfiltrates data, so they pay the ransom. But this only motivates attackers to seek more. The bad news is that attackers are following through on extortion threats even after the ransom has been paid. This means CSIOs are under much more pressure because a successful attack is much more likely to create a full-scale service disruption that affects their customers." And in a different but related report published by Proofpoint just yesterday, Monday, which presents the results from a survey of thousands of employees and hundreds of IT professionals across 7 countries, they found that 70% of the surveyed participants reported having experienced at least one ransomware attack last year in 2021. 70% of respondents. 60% of them opted to negotiate with the attackers, so 60% of the 70%, and many of them ended up paying ransom more than once. Now, the only way that would work would be that the initial ransom is for both data encryption and a promise to destroy exfiltrated data. Then once that money is in hand and the decryption keys have been provided, that second demand is made for the second half, even though the promise was nothing, there'd be no exfiltration if you pay up. Well, so the money is received, decryption keys happen, then a demand is made, a second demand for additional money. And the logic must be that getting an additional payment from a victim who has already paid once is easier. They've got a proven payment channel. They figured out how to convert dollars into Bitcoin or whatever. They've already invested something, in ransom. So what's just a bit more to keep they believe to keep their data out of the hands of either the dark web or the public? And really, why should such people, as the bad guys, not turn right around either way if the victim pays up or not and resell the data again on the dark web? Again, as I said, why delete an asset? It seems clear that that's what would be done. For a while there was, and we talked about it here, a working theory that the ransomware gangs were, to some degree, they had a motivation to be concerned about their reputation, since it would tend to increase the likelihood of the ransom being paid if it was generally understood that when ransom is paid, decryption keys are provided. But that was before that secondary incentive was added, because it was added later on, of data exfiltration and its extortion to prevent its subsequent release and or sale. And it was also before the ransomware as a service model tended to blur the lines of who was doing the attacking and who was responsible for keeping their word. While the ransomware as a service operators tightly control the unlocking of the encrypted data, we know that, it's the separate individual affiliates who obtain control of and get the pre-encrypted exfiltrated data. They hold that separately. Therefore, the RAS operators have no say or control over the possibility of secondary extortion being perpetrated by the independent affiliates. So, there's just been a lot of change in this side of the world. And finally, whereas ransomware was a little-known novelty once upon a time with only a few perpetrators, it's grown into a well-known and recognized form of cybercrime with too many villains now to count. So it's dramatically changed the calculus about any one gang's reputation. It just no longer matters. As a consequence of all this, all the data points to the only sane approach being to never capitulate to ransomware demands. Unless you absolutely have no backups of your systems and the data which has been encrypted is absolutely has to be restored. And at this point, there's no excuse for not having backups of your systems. Don't pay the ransom, restore systems and data from backups, and immediately alert law enforcement authorities of the incident. To do otherwise, all the data suggests, and even common sense, as we've seen how this terrain has evolved over the last few years, doing otherwise will just be futile. You'll end up losing money to the bad guys. They'll be happy to take your money, and you'll still be in trouble. So it just doesn't, at this point, makes no sense to pay up. There's just no logic behind it. Unless, again, as I said, understanding all of this, you still make the calculus for some other reason that it's the only way out is to pay the ransom. And then, hope for the best. Okay. Daxin, D-A-X-I-N. Yesterday, Symantec's threat hunter team, which is now part of Broadcom Software, posted really interesting details of what is by far the most technically sophisticated Chinese backdoor malware these researchers had ever seen. And, it's one thing when script kiddies get something from GitHub and go scan and hope that they get lucky. The whole idea of malware being really, really good is unnerving, on a different level. And
it makes me think the government wrote it, not script kiddies. It's a little scary.
Yeah. Exactly. This is not, as we will see, Daxin did not come from no script kiddie. We're only ever talking about stuff that Russia is doing and China is doing. I just have to hope because, things are getting crazy in the world right now. You have to hope that our government is every bit as competent and, has, over there, they're doing podcasts about us and stuff that they're finding from the NSA, much as we're talking about, China malfactors. Anyway, their post, Symantec's post, stated that the malware appears to be used in a long-running, and I'll put some dates on that in a minute, espionage campaign against select governments and critical infrastructure targets. Daxin, as they named it, allows an attacker to perform various Whoa, I forgot that weight turned. Turn that. Sorry about that.
Is that Pebbles?
Yeah, it was actually a 4-year-old son of someone on CompuServe.
Oh, cute.
And I've had that sound file from the days of CompuServe.
Yeah, which means the kid's 38 now. But okay, fine.
Yeah, exactly. And does not want to be reminded of the way he sounded back then.
Man.
So, Daxin, as they named it, allows an attacker to perform various communications and data gathering operations on the infected computer. And it was seen in use as recently as November of 2021, so a few months ago, by attackers linked to China. Most of the targets appear to be organizations and governments of strategic interest to China. And further strengthening the Chinese Daxin link is the fact that other tools also commonly seen and associated with Chinese espionage actors have also been found on some of the computers where Daxin had been deployed. Symantec's researchers were extremely impressed and said that considering Daxin's capabilities and the nature of its deployed attacks, it appears to be optimized for use against hardened targets, allowing the attackers to burrow deep inside a target's network and exfiltrate data without raising suspicion. And this is not all just theoretical. Thanks to Broadcom's membership in the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, the JCDC, Symantec researchers worked with CISA, our Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, to engage with multiple foreign governments targeted by Daxin and assisted in its detection and remediation. So these guys have been on the front line with this thing. Symantec feels that this one will be worthy of multiple blog postings, but they provided sufficient meat for us in their first disclosure. Daxin is a Windows kernel driver, which is a bit chilling due to the unfettered power that anything operating in the kernel has. And this makes it a relatively rare format for ransomware. It implements sophisticated communications functionality, which both provides a high degree of stealth and permits the attackers to communicate with infected computers on highly secured networks, including and specifically those where direct internet connectivity is not available. Its capabilities suggest that the attackers invested significant effort into developing communication techniques that can blend in unseen with normal network traffic on the target's network. Specifically, the malware avoids starting its own network services. Instead, it commandeers legitimate services already running on infected computers. It's capable of relaying its communications across a network of infected computers within the compromised organization network. The attackers can select an arbitrary path across infected computers and send a single command that instructs these computers to establish requested connectivity. This use case has been optimized by Daxin's designers. By using network tunneling, attackers are able to communicate with legitimate services on the victim's network that can be reached from any infected computer. So, it's essentially a backdoor, allowing an attacker to perform various operations on the infected computer, such as reading and writing arbitrary files. The attacker can also start arbitrary processes and interact with them. While the set of operations available to Daxin is quite narrow, this was deliberate because its real value lies in its stealth and its communications capabilities. Okay, so listen to this. Daxin is capable of hijacking legitimate TCP connections on the fly. It does this by intercepting and monitoring all incoming TCP traffic for certain patterns. Whenever any of these patterns are, in other words, triggers, when any of these patterns are detected, Daxin disconnects the legitimate recipient of the traffic and takes over the connection. It has an entire TCP IP stack that it brings along on its own. It then performs a custom key exchange with the remote peer, with both sides following complementary steps to perform that negotiation. The malware can be both the initiator and the target of a key exchange. And as we know, the beauty of a public key exchange is that the exchange traffic need not be secret, and an eavesdropper cannot learn the key which is negotiated during the exchange. A successful key exchange opens an encrypted, tunneled communications channel for receiving commands and sending responses. Daxin's use of hijacked TCP connections affords a high degree of stealth to its communications and helps to establish connectivity on networks with strict firewall rules. So, for example, say that some organization maintains any sort of public-facing service, such as a website. Daxin would get into the web server, hook into its pre-encrypted and post-decrypted communications, monitoring them for a magic cookie. Once that magic cookie is seen, Daxin knows that the remote attacker, looking just like anyone else on the internet, has connected and emitted what looks like any other web query. But at that point, it takes over the connection from the web server, negotiates its own encryption key with the remote individual that sent the magic cookie, then switches to its own private encryption, tunneling its communications through the existing connection. To anyone looking, this is just an HTTPS connection like a bazillion others. It's encrypted already, so this double layer of encryption goes unseen. But of course, it's not like any other connection. Daxin's built-in functionality can be augmented by deploying additional components on the infected computer. It provides a dedicated communication mechanism for such components by implementing a device named // which is a standard Windows nomenclature for a device driver, TCP4. The malicious components can open this device to register themselves for communication. Each of the components can associate a 32-bit service identifier with the opened TCP4 handle. The remote attacker is then able to communicate through Daxin with selected components by specifying a matching service identified when sending messages of a certain type. The driver also includes a mechanism to send back responses. So this sets up an entire private communications infrastructure. There are dedicated messages that encapsulate raw network packets to be transmitted via the local network adapter. Daxin then tracks network flows such that any response packets are captured and forwarded to the remote attacker. In other words, it serves as a bidirectional network tap, allowing the attacker to establish and to tap communications with any legitimate services that are reachable from the infected machine on the victim's internal network. One of Daxin's most powerful and unique capabilities is its ability to create multi-hop communications channels across multiple infected computers, where the list of nodes is provided by the attacker in a single command. For each node, the message includes all the details required to establish communication: the node's internal IP address, its TCP port number, and the credentials used during custom key exchange. When Daxin receives this message, it picks the next node from the list. Then it uses its own internal TCP IP stack to connect to the TCP server listed in the selected entry. Once connected, Daxin starts the initiator side protocol. If the peer computer is infected with Daxin, this results in opening a new encrypted communication channel. An updated copy of the original message is sent over this new channel, where the position of the next node to use is incremented. The process then repeats for the remaining nodes on the list. And if it sounds familiar, that's because it's a bit like onion routing, and it allows Daxin's influence to gradually permeate and penetrate deep inside a highly protected network environment as its remote attackers gradually map out and remotely explore the network environment they have infected. The Symantec Threat Hunter team has identified Daxin deployments in government organizations as well as entities in the telecommunications, transportation, and manufacturing sectors. Several of these victims were identified with the assistance of the Singapore-based PwC Threat Intelligence team. While the most recent known attacks involving Daxin occurred in November of 2021, the earliest known sample of the Daxin malware dates from 9 years ago in 2013. And that malware had already incorporated all of the advanced features seen in the most recent variants, with a large part of the code base having already been fully developed at that time 9 years ago. This suggests that the attackers were already well established by 2013, with Daxin's features reflecting their expertise back then at the time. And Symantec believes that it goes back even further. An older piece of backdoor malware known as Zala, Z-A-L-A, contained a number of common structural features, but lacked many of Daxin's advanced capabilities. Daxin appears to build on Zala's networking techniques, reusing a significant amount of distinctive code and even sharing certain magic constants with Zala. And they also share the use of a certain public library, which is used to perform the kernel, the Windows kernel API hooking that is also common between variants of Daxin and Zala. The extensive sharing and common code base indicates that Daxin's developers at least had access to Zala's code base. They believe that both malware families were used by the same Chinese-linked actor, which became active no later than 2009. So an additional 4 years before 2013 when Daxin was first seen. So, needless to say, this is not something that anyone wants to have crawling around inside their network machines.
Yeah.
And you have to ask yourself, how sure are you that you don't have it?
Not that it matters at all, but it's probably because it's Chinese Dachshund. Da being one word and Xin being pronounced shin. But I think Daxin is fine. It's just that's probably Chinese, I would guess, right?
I bet it is.
Bet
Thank
it is.
you.
Yeah. But if you said Dachshund, I would say, come on, man. Come on, man. I know how to pronounce log4j, that's for sure.
That's true.
Although some people say log4j, which I think is wrong.
Oh, I think it is too.
Yeah.
Let's take a break,
Yes,
and then we're going to talk about Whither or Whither.
Whither log4j. Daxin. Our show today brought to you by Privacy. Privacy.com. I love privacy. I've been talking about it for years. Talking about it to everybody who would listen, even before they were an advertiser, because it's just such a good idea. The other day, my daughter said, "I want to go. I want a gym membership. Can you give me a credit card?" She's a student still, so I'm paying for things like that. I said, "Sure. Go to privacy.com on the web." I say, I want to create a card. They say, okay, is it a one-time use card or a merchant card? One-time use, you use it once, doesn't work ever again. Merchant card, the minute you use it, gets locked to that merchant, can't be used anywhere else. So I said merchant card. I could then set up limits on the total spend. I know what the monthly subscription is for the gym, so I made that, a little more. That's the limit. You can have day, month, week. You could have year, total, individual charges, total control. And the thing I love about this is there's a share feature, which is so great. They say, okay, who are you sharing this with? Give me her email address. I do. And that's it. She gets an email. She doesn't have to join privacy or anything. It's not texting her a credit card number with a CVC code and expiration. It's all handled securely. It's just a great way to share cards. I use privacy anytime I need to use a credit card online because it's secure. So when I use a credit card at Amazon.com or at my Verizon account, it's locked in to Verizon or it's locked into Amazon. Even if it leaked out, no one else can use it. I get a report on any declines, so I completely control how it's used, limits on that and so forth. There's some other great features. If you're signing up for subscriptions with privacy.com, you can pause it or delete the card and it's gone. That's it. You don't have to figure out how to cancel. You just pause it and no more payments. And I can't tell you how often that comes in handy because oddly enough, companies that have subscriptions often make it hard to cancel. They don't want you to. Privacy does so much, so much. Great for subscriptions, recurring payments, great for sketchy sites where, I don't know. They have a Chrome extension and a Firefox extension. It makes it very easy. You tie it into your bank account or debit card. You'll get complete information about how that card's being used. But you know who doesn't get information? The merchant. It's completely private. They don't get your name, your address, or anything else. In fact, with privacy, when a merchant asks for my name, address, zip code, I can say anything I want. If I'm using a privacy card, privacy says, yeah, we know, and pays it anyway. So it's completely private. That's why the name, privacy.com. They've got a new summary page you just added, which is great. So I can see a summary of all my charges. I can use tags so I can organize them that way, which because I use privacy so much, I need because I have literally hundreds of credit cards now under privacy.com. It's just so great. It's just, I can't recommend it highly enough. Protects your financial identity online. It's more secure. You don't have to worry about a credit card being lost or stolen. Privacy, Privacy, just like it sounds, privacy.com/security now. Sign up for an account. If you're a new customer, you'll automatically get $5 to spend on your first purchase. Privacy.com/security now. Browse around. They have different plans. Most people just do the free plan. I actually pay, I think it's $10 a month for a pro account because then I get 1% cash back. And since I use privacy so much, I get more than the cost of it back. So it makes a lot of sense. But I'm just saying, look around and then, so when and by the way, somebody said, you mean I don't have to give them my personal information when I sign up? No, of course you do. They just don't give it to the merchants. And you can, when you're using a privacy card, you can use whatever you want. But obviously, when you sign up, you have to give your personal accurate information. I think I confused somebody with that. Well, yeah, because they've got to figure out how to charge you, right? I think it's the greatest thing. I've been using it, I think, 4 or 5 years now. Ever since we talked on this show about burner cards, and a lot of the companies that used to offer burner cards stopped. Then I found privacy.com, and that's it. I got it. I got my place. Privacy.com/security now. Please use that address so they know you heard about it here. Privacy.com/security now. Now, Log4j.
Yeah. So the chart, I've got a chart here in the show notes, which begins on the 10th of December last year with a big spike. Then it drops a bit, and then it just sort of shows a nice mountain, going up one side and coming down the other. There is a weird, very, very tall spike kind of late in the game. It turns out that's been attributed to a one-day coordinated security scan by a security firm. So that's not attack traffic. But mostly what we see is, a lot of initial interest, and then it kind of dies off. Johannes Ulrich, the security guy over at SANS, who documented this log4j scanning activity, said, "Our sensors detected exploit attempts almost immediately," meaning with the release of the original release of the log4j news. And of course, we know log4shell exploit vulnerability scanning experienced a large cross-internet spike in activity as threat actors around the world began searching the internet frantically for Java apps that might have used the log4j library and were testing the exploit to see what was vulnerable. But with the advantage now that we have of hindsight, a couple months worth, we can see that this spike in activity lasted for maybe about 3 weeks until the end of 2021, so basically through December. And as we've noted here previously, one of the reasons for attackers losing interest in log4shell, the exploit of log4j, which was the library, was the complex nature of the Java ecosystem, which resulted in the log4j library being used and implemented in different ways across Java apps. That meant that a drop-in, dead simple, universal exploit wasn't available, and that the first exploit that was published, which set off the gold rush scanning frenzy, turned out to be not so universal after all. Bad guys had to reverse engineer individual Java apps, figure out how and where they were using log4j, and then try different exploit variations to see what worked best. In other words, by definition, not script kiddie compatible. This entire process was and still is complex and time-consuming. And given that other new vulnerabilities, oh look, there's something shiny. New vulnerabilities are being disclosed on a nearly daily basis, some of which are easier to exploit. Log4j was soon relegated to the perhaps I'll get back to that eventually category. But that doesn't mean that there are, that these are not the droids you're looking for, so move along. The threat is still real. And if you look at that graph, the scanning has not gone down to zero. It's still kind of percolating along there. It's just very good news that the first example of an exploit was only the lowest of the hanging fruit. The fact that the rest of the fruit may well be, is still there but is well out of reach, casual reach, just means that it's moved into the longer-term toolkit of the world's more serious actors. So, a case in point, actually, of exactly this was SentinelOne's recent report that one of Iran's state-sponsored groups was exploiting the log4shell vulnerability to compromise VMware Horizon servers recently. This was only a couple weeks ago. This confirms that not all attackers have lost interest in the vulnerability and that the threat remains present for companies running unpatched Java systems. So we talked about this having gone away. I just wanted to make sure that, that people understand this is going to be an issue. Unfortunately, it is beginning to take the shape of all these other problems that we have that never completely go away anymore. We understand from what Google's research showed that we talked about initially, that fixing the existing installed base of Java cannot possibly be an overnight event. Thanks to the complexity of new attacks, as an industry, as a whole, we did dodge a bullet. So, we don't want to get cocky, because the other thing that the chart shows, as I said, is that scanning has never returned back to zero. It's now holding constant. Okay. As everyone knows, we're in the midst of an interesting time. Russia's President Putin has directed Russia's military to launch an attack against Ukraine. Many did not believe it would happen, and the world is still recovering from its shock, but happening it is. We're talking about this here because, as I mentioned briefly last week, the attacks have not only been conventional. they've also had a prominent and evolving cyber component. And while there has been a long-standing, low-level cyber standoff between major global adversaries, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, we haven't yet experienced what any country might be able to unleash upon another. And frankly, having listened to well-placed and well-informed experts in the U.S., everyone is a bit afraid to see what full-scale cyber warfare might look like. We know what happens when you shoot a bullet, when you launch a missile or roll a tank. Though the effects can be deadly, they are understandable and contained. But the presumption held by everyone is that all of the major powers have already deeply infiltrated each other's networks. And I mean, that Daxin thing I was just talking about is a perfect example. It's like, that is just creepy to think that something that powerful is scattered around, and apparently it is. And with this infiltration of each other's networks is the planting of cyber bombs and booby traps. And no one's really anxious to go first. So as I said, we're in the midst of an interesting time. Last week, the day after I mentioned the previous Russian DDoS attacks against Ukraine's military and some of its banking infrastructure, additional DDoS attacks were launched against those same Ukrainian facilities. In response, the Ukrainian government issued a call to arms to local hackers, after which alleged hacktivists claimed credit for knocking the website of the Russian state-run news service RT News offline. And, if we all just keep this at the level of DDoS attacks, we're going to be fine. Then, last Thursday, Russian government websites went dark to some parts of the world after being targeted with a flood of web traffic via a DDoS attack, which attempted to knock them offline. No one has claimed credit, so it's unclear who directed the attack or if it was successful in disrupting sites. The reason there's some question about the success of the attacks is that the websites in question began claiming to be teapots. Now, presumably Russian teapots.
What?
We've talked about this before, but it's due for a refresher. A web server replying to an HTTP query begins its reply with a 3-digit code to indicate the server's overall response to the query. Any response beginning with a 1 is informational. Responses beginning with a 2 indicate success. 3 indicates one of a number of redirection types, like temporary, so don't remember the redirection, or this is permanent, so please don't ask for that old URL again. Responses beginning with 4 represent a client error, that is like asking for something bad, and 5 is a server error. Within that framework, 200 is the most common code representing success, and everyone is familiar with the infamous 404 error, which means that the resource being requested was not found or does not exist on the server. Back on April 1st of 1998, thus the traditional April Fool's Day, Internet RFC 2324 was offered to describe and standardize version 1.0 of the HTCP/CP. HTCP/CP is, of course, the lesser-known hypertext coffee pot control protocol. In describing the rationale and scope of the proposed HTCP/CP protocol, this RFC explains, there is coffee all over the world. Increasingly, in a world in which computing is ubiquitous, the computists want to make coffee.
Sure they
Coffee
do.
brewing,
Yeah.
I mean, it's self-evident,
sure,
right?
yeah.
Coffee brewing is an art. But the distributed intelligence of the web-connected world transcends art. Thus, there is a strong, dark, rich requirement for a protocol designed espressoli for the brewing of coffee.
Oh, dear.
Coffee is brewed using coffee pots. Networked coffee pots require a control protocol if they are to be controlled. Thus, this document specifies a hypertext coffee pot control protocol, HTTP/CP, which permits the full request and responses necessary to control all devices capable of making these popular caffeinated hot beverages. Okay.
This is because of the Cambridge coffee pot, right? The very first webcam. Yeah.
With that background, the protocol needed to provide for an error in the event that the hypertext coffee pot control protocol was inadvertently applied to a non-coffee pot.
Yes.
The HTTP response 418, beginning with the digit 4, which is universally used to signify an error made by the client, was thereby defined to mean I'm a teapot.
Oh, that's great.
And thus not the appropriate target of the HTTP/CP protocol. The formal definition of error 418 says, quote, the HTTP 418 I am a teapot client error response code indicates that the server refuses to brew coffee because it is permanently a teapot.
This was an April Fool's joke, but it's a real. But they implemented it.
Yes. A combined coffee/teapot that is only temporarily out of coffee would instead return an error 503. Just to be particular about that. And in fact, Leo, there was a move some years ago to remove the 418 I'm a teapot from Java. And as I recall, a 15-year-old started created a website, saved the 418 code, which generated so much momentum that 418 was formalized and reserved, and the other languages that were considering pulling it all decided, nope, we're going to leave 418 in there.
If you go to google.com/teapot, you actually get a 418. So even Google's in on this one.
So the upshot of all this is that some websites use the 418 I'm a teapot response for requests they do not wish to handle, such as automated queries. And that is the response that the mil.ru Russian website and a few others began returning last Thursday.
Wow.
This is believed to be a geofencing measure denying any further processing of incoming IP traffic outside of Russia.
Wow.
So at least in this case, the sites in question are not down due to DDoS. They are administratively blocked to non-Russian internet traffic. And clearly, you're a teapot.
Very funny. Very funny. Yeah, I saw a number of people initially saying, oh, these sites are down, and others saying use a VPN exiting in Russia, and they're still up. It's just geofencing.
Yep. We can't get to them. And in fact, we did talk at some length some time ago about Russia having deliberately experimented, and it was a little spooky at the time, with their own DNS system rather than relying on
they have their own GPS, GLONASS.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, but normally DNS relies on the global root servers,
Right.
and DNS won't work without the root servers. Well, they've implemented an internal DNS facility that would allow Russia to go off the internet and become, a self-sustaining, it wouldn't all just go down and dark for everybody. Without connectivity to the rest of the world, you have a rather prescribed internet, but still it would be up and running. And vital services and things presumably would be using, Rusky DNS as opposed to, regular DNS. So on the question, will the U.S. attack? Last Thursday, NBC News headlined their story, quote, Biden has been presented with options for massive cyber attacks against Russia, unquote, with the subhead, the options presented include disrupting the internet across Russia, shutting off power, and stopping trains in their tracks, unquote. Whereupon the White House immediately denied the report that President Biden has been presented with an arsenal of ways to launch massive cyber attacks against Russia, attacks which will be designed to disrupt Russia's ability to sustain its military operations with Ukraine. Within hours of the report, Press Secretary Jen Psaki said in a tweet that NBC got it wrong. She tweeted, quote, this report on cyber options being presented to @POTUS is off base and does not reflect what is actually being discussed in any shape or form, unquote, she said. However, NBC subsequently made clear that they felt their reporting was quite well sourced, accurate, and noted that the White House had not indicated what about the story was incorrect. NBC's sources, which were cited as 2 U.S. intelligence officials, 1 Western intelligence official, and another person briefed on the matter, told NBC that no final decisions had been made as of earlier Thursday. One of those sources said the possibilities range from the aggravating to the destructive. Quote, you could do everything from slow the trains down to have them fall off the tracks, unquote, said the source, who'd been briefed on the matter. In other reporting, there were passing references to messing with train track switches. So I think that gives us some further information. But that source also said that most of the potential measures on the slate of possible cyber attacks, a slate again, Press Secretary Psaki said was inaccurate, would not be destructive, but would rather be designed to be disruptive, hence falling short of an act of war by the United States against Russia, according to NBC. To which I say, wow, to all that. One of the problems with that sort of interference is that it would almost have to leave footprints. If President Biden were being provided with these options, he would also certainly be told that this would inevitably be tipping our hand to Russia about at least the cyber capabilities that were used, because they would be exposed. If the U.S. is really able to shut down Russian rail transportation or run their trains off the rails, that's a significant capability that one would not want to waste, since it could probably never be used again. So the question is this the time to use and inevitably expose such a capability, assuming that it could not be used again? And it would definitely aggravate Russia and almost certainly trigger a response. The main trouble, as I've noted before, is that all sides are keenly aware that no one is able to withstand a cyber attack. Today, everyone depends crucially upon their networks. Yet everyone's networks are a true mess. Everyone has instances of crappy software still running, which was written long before security was a consideration. And as we've seen, and as this podcast chronicles ad nauseum, even today, when network security is given extensive lip service, we're still unable to get it right. In a few minutes, we're going to be talking about a catastrophic mistake Samsung recently made, or made actually a while ago and had continued, which cripples the security of 100 million of their Android handsets. We still don't have the structures in place to get security right today. The only good news is we're not alone. No one else does either, and we're all using the same crappy software. As a consequence, no one dares to pull that trigger. Okay. Last Wednesday, I was working away on SpinRight. I had Windows Weekly running in the background, as I often do. Leo, you, Paul, and Mary Jo were talking, as you guys always do, about what's on your minds regarding Microsoft, Windows, the enterprise, and often the industry at large.
Yeah, so today, in case you thought things hadn't changed, Microsoft arbitrarily, and by the way, we know for a fact, arbitrarily decided on Windows 11's hardware requirements, right? And they did it to help the PC industry.
Yeah. All the TPM 2.0 stuff, the 8th generation Intel.
Exactly. Yeah. Completely arbitrary.
Yeah. It runs fine on the earlier stuff. Nope.
So, it's very interesting to me they're not blocking the people from running it, right? Like, they're still letting you do it.
You know what, though? If they did, I think there would have been a lawsuit and a class action lawsuit. And one of those things that would have come out is what I just said, that those hardware restrictions are completely arbitrary, and that people who run Windows 11 on non-supported hardware are, in fact, not endangering the community. They're not, there's nothing bad going on at all. And that Microsoft just did this arbitrarily, or artificially, I should say, to help drive PC sales.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Now, so I stopped coding SpinRite. It's like my mouth hung open for Paul. For Paul to just say so matter-of-factly, we know it for a fact.
Yeah.
Now, this, of course, well, not that we know it for a fact, but our listeners, this podcast listeners, have been putting up with me ranting about this from the first moment that this issue arose, because from a software engineering, computer science standpoint, which is the only thing I care about and the only thing that matters, whether Microsoft wants it to be true or not, it had to be that Microsoft was deliberately and calculatingly lying to the entire world. What Microsoft was saying about their uncertainty, over which systems Windows 11 could be safely run on, simply could not be true. It was not possible. It wasn't computer science. It had to be management-driven, marketing-inspired gibberish. Recall that Security Now, number 835, was titled TPM version 1.2 versus 2.0 during that podcast, because this thing just was driving me crazy. We looked feature by feature through the differences between the two, searching for any rational computer science justification for Microsoft to require Windows 11 to have TPM 2.0 over 1.2, while Windows 10 was working quite happily with version 1.2. We found none, not one. What we found was that Microsoft was already using TPM 1.2 for everything they wanted to protect with TPM 2.0. Now, it may seem odd, but I would have no problem at all if Microsoft had just told the truth. If they had said that they don't want Windows 11 to run on older machines because they want to require people to purchase new hardware when they upgrade their software, I couldn't have cared less. That would have been fine with me because it would have been the truth. Of course, it would have infuriated everyone else. Now, I don't know what I will do on October 14th of 2025 when support might be ending for Windows 10. I'll have a large stable of machines, as will many people, that would happily run Windows 11 just fine. And by then, we can hope that all of the nonsense changes they've been making to Windows 11 will have settled down. By that time, we'll all be able to upgrade our machines that don't currently qualify to run Windows 11. Will we be able to upgrade them? Will Microsoft decide, okay, guess what? Surprise, it works just fine. It's difficult to imagine not. And there's just no other way to look at this other than Microsoft having really messed this thing up. This is just sad. But anyway, it was very refreshing, Leo, to hear, the gang over on Windows Weekly say, yeah. Yeah. Everyone knows that.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, well, that's good because it had to be true. Wow. I had a piece of closing the loop feedback. Someone sent me, "Hi, Steve. How can I get the AS number of my bank? NS lookup doesn't do it. I want to check before I enter my password that the ASN hasn't changed. A little bit of personal self-help to avoid a BGP attack on my money." And that was a good question. Of course, he's talking about the last week's topic, which was the BGP attack, where some very clever guys managed to reroute some traffic to a different location. And it sort of begs the question, what could someone do? Okay, and the answer is, first of all, just to clarify, individual entities like a bank or like GRC or like TWiT do not have AS numbers. I actually regret not getting one for myself back in when I first got my GRC internet connectivity, because I could have back then. There were plenty of IPv4 addresses. Nobody thought they were going to expire. You have to have at least a Class C network in order to be an AS. So had I obtained a Class C network, I would own my own block, something dot star. I would own a Class C network that would be mine. I would be an AS. And so when I went from Vario over to level 3, I would have transported that IP space with me. And the routing tables would have changed so that the packets bound from my block of IP addresses now went to level 3, where they used to go to Vario. My IPs would have never changed. Instead, I'm not an AS. That never occurred to me. I didn't think of it. I've got a block of IPs. And when I did move to level 3, they all had to change. DNS had to propagate. So, it's not the end of the world, but it's just not quite as cool. But the point is, individual entities don't have them. Networking companies do. So what would change would be the certificate. And that's where our GRC certificate fingerprinting comes in. What had to happen for that BGP attack to get pulled off, as it was the moment the IP addresses were rerouted, they applied with an entity supporting the Acme automation API, like, for example, Let's Encrypt. They applied for a certificate for the domain they were hijacking. And at that point, all of the traffic was coming to them. So Let's Encrypt was able to verify that they were the apparent owner of that domain and would instantly give them a certificate. But it wasn't the certificate of the bank, right? It wasn't the actual certificate for whatever it was, developers.something. It was a different certificate that had just been minted for that, because the actual owner of that domain is protecting their certificate as one of their most prized possessions. So to answer this listener's question, if you were really concerned, you would look at the certificate of those few entities where you absolutely want to make sure you never have a connection spoofed, and look at the so-called thumbprint of the certificate, which it must change if a different certificate is issued. It does change, even like for me, every couple years, now every year for all of us. When our certs change, we get a different thumbprint. The certificate, even if it's issued from the same CA, it will have a different timestamp. It'll have, it is a different key. So everything about it is different. The hash will be different. The thumbprint will be different. So that would set off a false positive when that domain rekeys. So it's a little less useful to do that. But anyway, I thought that was sort of an interesting question. How would you protect yourself against being the victim on the user end of a BGP attack? And it would be that the authentic certificate could not be the one you're connecting to. And so that's what to check.
Good to know.
I'll just mention before we take a break that SpinRite's 9th development pre-release went out last week, as I expected it would, and I'm pleased to report that it was a significant win. Reports of it successfully working across a number of systems where previous releases had not were posted to confirm that the things I believed were fixed were indeed fixed. We found, and after that, I fixed a problem with the BIOS on a Supermicro motherboard, and we also found and I fixed a new bug that I had introduced with a new mini benchmark, which directs SpinRite to use the firmware for its bulk scanning when the system is somehow faster than my own hardware drivers. We've seen that a little bit. It's not a huge win, but we want SpinRite to be as fast as possible. And if that means using an existing adapter's own firmware, so be it. At this moment, because I just hadn't had the chance to dig into it, we do have a couple odd problems that have been found. So I'll be digging into that this evening. But it feels as though we're getting very close to having these last few bits resolved, with SpinRite able to operate robustly on every piece of hardware anyone has tested, which is around 300 people, generally each with multiple machines. And I have to admit, I'd been holding my breath on this one since the immediately previous release was December 23rd. And since I had re-engineered SpinRite's hardware interrupt handling, made many other improvements, introduced the mini benchmark and the awareness of the possibility of system firmware being faster, everything was working on my systems, but none of it had been widely tested by our development community. So today, I'm feeling quite relieved to have our testing gang synchronized and up to date with SpinRite's latest code, which has now largely been proven. So as I said, I'll be back to it this evening, get the few remaining problems fixed, and at that point, SpinRite's all-new hardware interface platform will be in place, not only for 6.1, but also for 7 and beyond. And it really is the case that now, or at that point, most of the hard work will be behind us. And it won't be that much longer before it will push past the point where testing stops now, and SpinRite will actually be running out on the surfaces of these drives. So, whew. What a project, but worthwhile.
Working hard. I love it. We will get to the show's title, Trust Dies in the Darkness. Find out what that all means in just a second. But first, a word from our sponsor, Bitwarden. It's my favorite password manager, the one I've been using for more than a year now. It's the only open source, cross-platform password manager that you can use at home, at work, on the go. It's trusted by millions, iOS, Android, macOS, Windows, Linux, of course, everywhere. That's one of the reasons I love Bitwarden. I can use it everywhere. There's a command line interface. You can run your own Bitwarden server if you want. So you can do a trust no one implementation. With Bitwarden, you can securely store credentials across personal and business worlds. It all begins with the personal vault, even the business plan. I love this. You set up your personal Bitwarden vault, and then you join the organization vault. So you get the best of both worlds. Your own vault, safe, secure, independent from the organizations, plus access to all the organization passwords, password sharing, and more. And it's so customizable. Bitwarden for Business uses enterprise policies to adapt to your business needs. They add features all the time. They just a couple of months ago added Bitwarden Send, which is a great way, a fully encrypted method to transmit sensitive information, whether text or files. You can generate, and your team can generate, unique, secure passwords for every site, of course. It's enterprise-grade security, of course. It's completely privacy compliant. GDPR, CCPA, the California Privacy Act, HIPAA, SOC 2 compliant. And their end-to-end encrypted vault helps mitigate phishing attacks, because when you go to a site that looks like your bank, Bitwarden knows it's not your bank and says, no. Don't you be filling in that password there. Bitwarden recently announced they've taken the first steps on 2 major initiatives. Really happy to share this with you. First, they've updated the icons in the app, which they were, I don't really care, but they were, maybe this was something, kind of a nice cosmetic feature. This is part of a whole, I understand, update to the user interface, which is coming. Cool. This is partly, by the way, because of the success of this Enterprise Edition and their Commercial Edition helps them do stuff like this. Bitwarden, by the way, free forever for individuals. Always has been, always will be. I pay, I think it's $10 a year to support them, but you don't have to. I like that too. In fact, I remember talking to them. They said, you should know, our business model does not require getting free users to upgrade to paid services. It's an open source project. It doesn't work that way. So they're happy to have you as a free user. They're happy, and they're not going to push you into doing anything you don't want to or need to do. But if you do have a business, you really should be looking at this. Another big change coming, the ability to switch accounts, and this is part of the desktop application. So you can have multiple Bitwarden accounts. This is a great way to separate personal and work accounts, for instance, or if you have multiple jobs. It's in a drop-down list. You don't have to log out, log in back again. Very easy to access items from either vault, so you can separate personal and work vault items. I love this. That's coming out to other platforms soon. Right now, it's available on the desktop. So let's talk about the business plans. Again, free forever for individuals. There's a Teams organization option, $3 a month per user, gives you things like sharing private data with your coworkers, your department, your entire organization. For bigger organizations, enterprises, you might want to use the Bitwarden Enterprise Organization Plan. That's just $5 a month per user. Bitwarden does, of course, and I'll say it again, believe that everyone should have access to password security, so individuals can use your basic free account forever. No limit on the number of passwords. I upgraded the premium account, less than $1 a month, as I said, just because I wanted to support them. But I never felt the need to, and never felt any pressure to. And if you're looking for secure password storage for the entire family, check out the family plan, the family organization option. 6 users all get premium features, $3.33 a month total. Not per user, but total. It's really easy to use the Bitwarden cloud. I do, because I trust them. I know they know how to keep it secure, and it's using strong encryption. So even if, something happened, I'm safe. The advantage, of course, of the Bitwarden cloud is then you get the Bitwarden Vault health reports, which let you monitor and manage security vulnerabilities. You can find exposed, reused, weak, or potentially compromised passwords. You can find any item in your vault without two-factor. So there's some nice benefits to that. Perhaps you heard about the credential stuffing problems with the other guy. We've talked about credential stuffing before. Basically, hackers find, when they find a breach and they find a username and password, they try it on a bunch of other sites. This is why you got to use different passwords on every site. I don't need to tell you this, you're a Security Now listener. But of course, a password manager, Bitwarden, makes that easy, makes it so you can store them, you don't have to remember them. This is the key. In your organization, your users are using their dog's name and their birthday as a password, and not only using it once, using it on every site they visit. You can't let them do that. but make it easy for them. Get them Bitwarden. It's the way to go. I always tell people use a password manager, and when they ask which one do you use, I always tell them Bitwarden, because it's open source, it's cross-platform. You can use it anywhere, at home, on the go, at work, on all your mobile devices. Trusted by millions of individuals, teams, and organizations worldwide. We're big fans. Get started with a free trial of Teams or Enterprise, or get started for free across all devices. Get started. Stay that way if you want as an individual user. But please do it through the website so they know you saw it. Bitwarden.com/twit. That way we get credit for it. I want credit for the free users too. Bitwarden.com/twit. Really happy Bitwarden user. For more than several years, I think, probably. I recommend it highly. Bitwarden.com/twit. Now, truth dies in darkness.
Yeah. The academic research paper, written by a trio of researchers at the University of Tel Aviv, will be presented during the upcoming Usenix Security 2022 Symposium. It's this summer. Their paper is titled Trust Dies in Darkness, Shedding Light on Samsung's TrustZone Keymaster Design. The paper is extremely interesting due to the specific mistakes it finds and highlights and describes in some detail. But it carries, and this is what I found so refreshing, it makes very explicit a far more important and overriding message that this podcast listeners have been hearing from me for years, which is that important, high volume, widely used, critical technologies cannot remain proprietary and secret. They simply can't. As a global society, we must change the way we think about these things. Somewhere around 100 million Samsung Android smartphone users cannot be allowed to carry critical security technology that no one else has ever been allowed to examine. But that's the world we have today. My favorite example that we frequently discussed here is voting machines. How is it conceivable that closed, proprietary, inherently secret electronic voting machines were ever allowed to be deployed and used within the United States? How? The U.S. could have easily used its buying power to require the use of an open design or fully independent public examination and auditing of these machines. The idea that the value added is not the proprietary hocus-pocus firmware, we've got that wrong. The value added should be the hardware implementation, which uses generic, widely vetted, and completely transparent software. But that's not what we do. Okay, so as for today's latest example of how this fallacy of secrecy has landed the very well-meaning but misguided Samsung in hot water, in the abstract of their 20-page paper, the researchers explain. They say, ARM-based Android smartphones rely on the TrustZone hardware support for a trusted execution environment, TEE, to implement security-sensitive functions. The TEE runs a separate, isolated TrustZone operating system, the TZOS, in parallel to Android. The implementation of the cryptographic functions within the TZOS is left to the device vendors who create proprietary, undocumented designs, which turns out to be these guys' hobby horse just as much as it is mine. They said, in this work, we expose the cryptographic design and implementation of Android's hardware-backed key store in Samsung's Galaxy S8, S9, S10, S20, and S21 flagship devices. We reverse engineered and provide a detailed description of the cryptographic design and code structure, and we unveil severe design flaws. We present an initialization vector, an IV, reuse attack on AES GCM that allows an attacker to extract hardware-protected key material, and a downgrade attack that makes even the latest Samsung devices vulnerable to the initialization vector reuse attack. We demonstrate working key extraction attacks on the latest devices. We also show the implications of our attacks on 2 higher-level cryptographic protocols between the TrustZone and a remote server. We demonstrate a working FIDO2 WebAuthn login bypass and a compromise of Google's secure key import. We discuss multiple flaws in the design flow of TrustZone-based protocols. Although our specific attacks only apply to the around 100 million devices made by Samsung, it raises the much more general requirement for open and proven standards for critical cryptographic and security designs. Okay, so a couple of things. ARM's Trusted Execution Environment, TEE, is their version of Apple's Secure Enclave, or the PC's TPM, or what Intel refers to as their Trusted Execution Technology, TXT. In every case, this notion of sequestering secrets and secret operations is a tacit acknowledgement of our generic inability to secure any larger attack surface. There's no actual computer science reason why the entire computer system cannot be secure, except that we've tried over and over and over until we finally just gave up, recognized and accepted the reality that as an industry, we don't know how to do that yet. We cannot secure our own systems. It's beyond us. So, all these various enclaves of whatever name they take are an attempt at encapsulation. The thinking is, if we can just separate the system's most critical and crucial operating secrets and the limited set of operations we need to perform with those secrets from the rest of the wild and woolly and totally beyond our control system, then at least we can keep those secrets secret. What these guys found, at tremendous expense to themselves, because this was all locked tightly away and considered to be proprietary, and they demonstrated, is that around 100 million of Samsung's Android-based smartphones contain a fundamental and horrifyingly simple and obvious, in retrospect, design flaw, which can be readily exploited to completely compromise any Samsung smartphone's most tightly held secrets. We talked a long time ago about what's known as authenticated encryption. The idea is that if you want to secure a secret, you need 2 things. You need to encrypt it for secrecy, and you also need to somehow detect any tampering with the secret. So you need both encryption of the plaintext and cryptographic authentication that the message has not been modified. Our longest time listeners will recall the industry's wrestling back and forth with the question, should you encrypt first, then apply authentication to the encrypted result, Or should you authenticate the plain text first and then encrypt that whole authenticated result? Does it matter? Many early systems didn't think it did, so they tossed a coin, or perhaps did what was easiest. But either way, they often got it backwards. There is only one right answer. The only right answer is that when both encrypting and authenticating, you always encrypt first and apply authentication last. The reason is, the first thing you want to do upon receiving the result for decryption is to authenticate that the received package has not been tampered with. You never decrypt first, then authenticate. And if anyone's wondering how we got to 860 episodes of this podcast and why my hair is no longer black, it's because we spent a lot of time back in the old days closely examining those questions, and the security doing it wrong could compromise. Squirrel, as I mentioned at the top of the show, needed authenticated encryption to protect its user's key material and the client's settings. You know, that Windows is a non-secure operating system, and that the Squirrel identity that's stored in Windows is just a file on the file system with no protection. So Squirrel needed to protect that file. And Samsung was in the same situation. They have so-called blobs that are on the file system that is this keying material. So like AMD and Samsung, AES-GCM, Advanced Encryption Standard, Galois Counter Mode, is the authenticated encryption algorithm I chose for Squirrel. So did Samsung. And, as I mentioned, I wrote my own implementation of it in C since I wanted to and did open source it. AES-GCM is elegant because it simultaneously encrypts and authenticates as it goes. It will absolutely, positively not decrypt and authenticate anything that's been altered after it was encrypted with this AES-GCM, because it's both. And that's what I needed for Squirrel. AES-GCM is, however, a bit brittle. Coincidentally, we were talking recently about brittle encryption and mistakes being made in cryptographic implementations. Last week was, how the guys who wrote the Hive ransomware got their encryption wrong. There are many instances in cryptography where something must only be used exactly once. Of course, the famous one-time pad has its usage restriction in its name. Last week's XOR key stream reuse was what hit and bit the Hive guys. And AES-GCM requires the use of a so-called initialization vector, the IV. The IV can be anything, and it's never a secret because it's required to reverse the process, so it's always out in full view. But the crucial requirement that makes AES-GCM somewhat brittle, that means you need to use it with care, with full awareness of what could go wrong, is that much as with an XOR key stream, AES-GCM's initialization vector must never be reused. I don't have it in the show notes, but in Samsung's API, they allow the caller of the API to provide the initialization vector. And that allows you to call the API multiple times with providing the same initialization vector, thus forcing reuse against like every rule of AES-GCM. And so without breaking Samsung's rules, because Samsung allowed the caller of their API to break the rules, it is possible to get this trusted execution environment to do things always with a fixed IV, and that results in well-known leakage problems for AES GCM. So now you can guess and understand the crucial and obvious mistake that Samsung's engineers made. The Tel Aviv researchers wrote, ARM is the most widely used processor in the mobile and embedded markets, and it provides TEE hardware support with the ARM TrustZone. TrustZone separates the device into two execution environments. And again, as I said, it's because, we have to. We've just given up trying to make Android or Windows or anything else truly secure. So let's just, let's create a little enclave where we can be absolutely sure we do it right. Unfortunately, Samsung did create an enclave. They just didn't do it right at the enclave boundary. So these two execution environments for ARM, a non-secure REE, which is the rich execution environment, in other words, Android, where the normal world operating system runs, and a secure TEE, the trusted execution environment, where the secure world operating system runs. The REE and the TEE use separate resources, separate memory, separate peripherals, and the hardware enforces the protection of the secure world, they wrote. They said in most mobile devices, the Android OS runs the non-secure normal world. As for the secure world, there are more choices. Even among Samsung devices, there are at least 3 different TrustZone operating systems, TZOSs, in use. They said the Android Key Store provides hardware-backed cryptographic key management services through a hardware abstraction layer that vendors such as Samsung implement. The Key Store exposes an API to Android applications, including cryptographic key generation, secure key storage, and key usage, in other words, encryption and signing. Samsung implements the HAL through a trusted application called the Keymaster TA, or Keymaster Trusted Application, which runs in the TrustZone. That Keymaster TA performs the cryptographic operations in the secure world using hardware peripherals, including a cryptographic engine. So, cool, high-tech, hardware enforced, everything you could possibly want. The Keymaster TA's secure key storage uses blobs, and that's what I was talking about, blobs out in the normal file system. They say these are wrapped, encrypted keys that are stored on the REEs, that is, the rich execution environment, in other words, Android file system. The wrapping, unwrapping, and usage of the keys are done inside the Keymaster TA using a device-unique hardware AES key. So, per device hardware never exposed to the outside world. Only the Keymaster TA should have access to the secret key material. The normal world should only see opaque key blobs. Although it is critical to rigorously verify and test such cryptographic designs, real-world TrustZone implementations receive relatively little attention in the literature. They wrote, "We believe that this is mainly due to the fact that most device vendors do not provide detailed documentation of their TZOS and proprietary TAs, like, Keymaster, and share little to no information regarding how the sensitive data is protected. To advance and motivate this research area, we decided to use the leading Android vendor, Samsung, as a test case. We reverse engineered the full cryptographic design and API of several generations of Samsung's Keymaster TA and asked the following questions. Does the hardware-based key protection of cryptographic keys remain secure even when the normal world is compromised? How does the cryptographic design of this protection affect the security of various protocols that rely on its security? Okay, and we know from the abstract at the top of their paper that their reverse engineering efforts paid off handsomely. They were also, of course, responsible for their pre-disclosure to Samsung. In that, they wrote, "We reported our IV reuse attack on S9 to Samsung Mobile Security in May of 2021. Then 3 months later, in August 2021, Samsung assigned CVE 2021-24444 with high severity to the issue and released, high severity to the issue and released a patch that prevents malicious IV reuse by removing the option to add a custom initialization vector from the API. According to Samsung, the list of patched devices includes the S9, the J3 Top, J7 Top, J7 Duo, Tab S4, Tab AS Lite, A6 Plus, and A9S. Also, we reported the downgrade attack on S10, S20, S21 in July of 2021. Then, 3 months later, in October 2021, Samsung assigned CVE 2021-25490 with high severity to the downgrade attack and patched models that were sold with Android POS or later, including the S10, the S20, and S21. The patch completely removes the legacy key blob implementation. And finally, in their conclusion, they scolded, much as I have, writing, vendors including Samsung and Qualcomm maintain secrecy around their implementation and design of TZOSs and TAs. As we have shown, there are dangerous pitfalls when dealing with cryptographic systems. The design and implementation details should be well audited and reviewed by independent researchers and should not rely on the difficulty of reverse engineering proprietary systems. In other words, this is classic Crypto 101. As we know, the great breakthrough in cryptography came when we switched away from using proprietary and secret non-keyed encryption algorithms that just scrambled the bits in some magic way to using public and publicly scrutinized keyed cryptographic algorithms, making the algorithm public and the keys secret. This same breakthrough principle must also be applied more deeply to the wider implementation and use of these now public algorithms. Their implementation needs to be public just the same as the algorithm itself. That is, what you do with the algorithm obviously matters. It's clear that the precise way these algorithms are used is every bit as important to the security of the entire system. And thus, the headline of their paper, Trust Dies in Darkness. And, as an industry, we need to shine a light. So I thought it was interesting that, these guys are coming to the same conclusion, which is, sure, you've got, here's Samsung trading on beautiful, academically designed, seriously vetted algorithms, and then keeping what they do with them secret. All these academics had to do was look at the fact that the AES-GCM was the algorithm being used, and maybe that wasn't obvious. Maybe Samsung never says it. They had to figure that out. And once they did that, they realized, oh my God, Samsung is letting users specify the initialization vector. Why? That should be designed, it should be obtained pseudo-randomly or maybe pure randomly, because there's probably a high-quality hardware random number generator as part of this trusted execution environment. So get a really long, completely unpredictable, never going to happen twice initialization vector and have the TE export it along with the result so that it can be provided later rather than having the user provide it. It's nuts. You would never do that with AES GCM, and Samsung did.
Is this attack, can it be done through an app or over the air?
Yes.
It can.
Yes. All it would take would be to run an app which uses the trusted execution environment to exercise the keys for its own purposes. So apps absolutely have access to the security API in Android. And so this would allow them to provide initialization vectors which would eventually leak the keying material that the whole point of this whole thing is to keep secret. And it's a little worrisome that, this problem has been around for so long and they're only patching from POS and later on S10, S20, and S21. So, once again, we're in this problem of older Samsung devices that are no longer being maintained and no longer getting firmware updates, having what is now a well-known, fully documented, critical security flaw.
So, yeah, the S22 is not vulnerable, apparently, the newest Samsungs.
Yes,
So
they do
fixed
stop
it, I
at
guess.
21.
Yeah. Android Pie is 3 years old, Android 9. And so there probably are a few older Samsungs that you can't update. What should owners of, say, a Galaxy S4, 5, 6, 7, what should they do? Should they be very careful about what they download, I guess, yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It would be something that you get into your computer that would, this is classic state actor or classic NSS. Who are
NSA.
the Pegasus?
NSO group. Yeah.
NSO,
So, but
exactly.
Okay. So Grayson's mom, not being a dissident or journalist or a opposition candidate, probably doesn't have to worry about the NSO group or a state actor.
What this does not do is simply dump the key. You've got to have something running, working at, like doing encryption over and over and over, and finding the biases in the
So this is a non-trivial
result.
exploit, then.
Yes,
Okay.
it is a non-trivial exploit.
So highly unlikely, in other words, as an average or normal user. I mean, remember, phones weren't routinely encrypted until relatively recently. I mean, I remember when you had to turn it on. I think iPhones might have always been.
Remember that it used to slow things down.
Yeah, you didn't want to turn it on.
So it'd be like, don't turn that on. It'll slow down
So
your
this
phone.
is no worse than that. In fact, it's considerably better than that, because if all your data is unencrypted, all a malicious app would have to do is read the drive.
I guess the only thing that I would say is that once upon a time, we weren't doing things that assumed encryption because we didn't have it.
Right.
And so we've gone so much further now. We got, Bitcoin wallets. People have a Bitcoin wallet in their phone.
Right.
And they're presuming that stuff is going to be kept, it's going to be kept encrypted.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, that is something that somebody might well be highly motivated to get into. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's, still requires some real sophistication, though.
The analogy would be that this provides a way to mine the phone's key.
Right.
It would be key mining.
Key mining,
is what this allows.
All right. So Grayson's mom has got it going on. She's okay. All right. He was worried. Grayson's a regular listener to the show, so good news. He's a good son, that Grayson. So is Steve Gibson. Who is Gib? Whose son are you? Is a guy named Gib?
Oh, Leo, he's long gone. And I think hopefully he went to heaven because he was certainly not programming in assembly language.
You've spent your time in hell already. That is the man, the myth, the legend, Steve Gibson, still writing in x86 ASM. In fact, that's how he wrote SpinRite, the world's finest mass storage recovery and maintenance utility. 6.0 is available at grc.com, his website. If you buy it today, you'll get an upgrade free to 6.1, and you can also participate in the development. While you're there, you can also get a copy of this show. There's 16 kilobit audio. These are the two unique versions of the show that he has. The 16 kilobit audio for the bandwidth impaired, and really nice transcripts written by Elaine Ferris. She actually is a court transcriptionist, so she's writing it all down and putting it in a transcript. All of that's at grc.com. While you're there, browse around. There's all sorts of other stuff besides SpinRite. It's a really fun site to take a look at. You can also get a copy of the show at our website, twit.tv/sn. Download audio or video from our site. That's our unique version, is the video. There's also a YouTube channel dedicated to it. You can subscribe in your favorite podcast player. If you're a member of the club, you get ad-free versions of the show as well, which is very nice. In fact, all of our shows are available ad-free. Now, you can join the club. $7 a month gets you all of the shows ad-free. Or if you just listen to Security Now, and I know there's people who this is all they listen to, I think it's $2.99 through iTunes, and I think soon Spotify as well. You'll be able to subscribe and just get an ad-free version of the show for $2.99. So it's a little less expensive. I think you might want Club Twit. Spend a little more, you get access to the Discord, you get all the shows ad-free, you get the Twit Plus feed, the special club-only shows we do, like the Untitled Linux show, Stacy's Book Club, the Giz Fizz. We are now taking a show from the club feed and making it public on Friday. This Week in Space is going to get its first episode. They've done like 3 or 4 in the club, so maybe that will be its 4th episode. But the first you can get if you're not a club member. The feed is twit.tv/TWIS. Rod Pyle, who is the editor-in-chief of the National Space Society's magazine Ad Astra, and from space.com, Tarek Malik, and together they talk about space. They talk about so much stuff going on. So that's a brand new show, audio only, coming out on Friday. If you're interested in Club Twit, you know all about it. If you're a Club Twit member, just go to twit.tv/clubtwit. We're going to be back here at our regular time, 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 Eastern, 21:30 UTC. Next Tuesday and every Tuesday, Patch Tuesday this coming week. So join us if you want to watch the show live.twit.tv, chat live at irc.twit.tv, or inside the Club Twit Discord. Thank you, Steve. Have a great week. See you next time.
Will do, my friend. Stay cool, and see you on the 8th.
Yes.
The world is changing rapidly. So rapidly, in fact, that it's hard to keep up. That's why Micah Sargent and I, Jason Howell, talk with the people making and breaking the tech news on Tech News Weekly every Thursday. They know these stories better than anyone, so why not get them to talk about it in their own words? Subscribe to Tech News Weekly, and you won't miss a beat every Thursday at twit.tv.
Security